This is adopting a notice of intention to increase water, sewer, and reclaimed water rates or rate components, fees, or service charges. All right, so is there, we discussed this, right, at our retreat? Go ahead.
So just for the public, this resolution just says that we're considering this and that we'll likely do it, but it does not include any specifics on how much it'll be or anything like that. This is just, there'll be public information given out to the public, and council will talk about this again before we actually do anything.
Madam Mayor, if I may, it is a legal requirement a certain amount of time before you do that. So it's just a formality more than anything else for that very purpose. Thank you, Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, I totally agree.
So does that mean that you will move to read resolution number 2024-19 by title only?
I so
What-
move. And I'm wondering if Aaron has anything to say.
Oh.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Erin Young, Water Resources Manager. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up our presentation and I wasn't paying attention to the question.
It was pretty straightforward. Do you have anything to say?
We have a lot to say. We have a pretty lengthy presentation. The 6, 7, 8 months we've been at this, we're pulling it all together tonight to present a rates package and adopt or consider adoption of the notice of intent. And with that, I'll introduce Carol Molesky with Stantec, and I'll pull up her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. I'm back. And this time, you're going to see the whole picture tonight. First of all, I just wanted to reiterate why we are here today, why I am here to give you all of the information all at once, but we are asking the City Council to adopt that notice of intent to increase rates or rate components, fees, and service charges. While I'm going to be showing you a lot of what you've seen before, there are some new components. So I'd like to walk through the agenda. We're going to talk back all the way back from when we started this rate study and discuss the financial plans. That was last fall. I'm going to talk about capacity fees again. We'll go over the miscellaneous fees that you have not seen yet. And then we'll talk about cost of service rates. Then we'll go back to that resolution and next steps. We've been talking about the pieces for all of these months of this rate study that we started nearly 10 months ago. And I'd like to show you this graphic that pulls it all together in terms of water services, rates, fees, and charges that helps operate the water fund, the reclaimed water fund, and the wastewater fund. So these fees and charges comprise monthly user charges. That's about 84% of your total revenues. And these are the primary sources of funding for your operations and maintenance and capital improvements. That includes the base fee and usage fees that encourage conservation. These are the rate structures that we've been talking about. We must keep up with the cost of inflation and other pressures to maintain good service to customers. So that's why we are coming back through to this rate study. These fees also ensure adequate fire protection, and these fees can be reduced by external funding sources, so loans, grants, etc. The next component of the fees are what we call miscellaneous fees, and those comprise about 7% of your total revenues for the utilities. These include permit fees, meter fees, late fees, et cetera, and hauled waste fees. And so far, I haven't talked to you about them, but I will tonight. Then we have the capacity fees. We spent some time talking about capacity fees. These make up 6% of your annual revenues on average, and they only apply to those new meters or new connections or increases in size or capacity of a connection. These help defray the cost associated with growth. They also, again, reduce the impacts to ratepayers so that we are not subsidizing new customers through rates. In total, all of these sources comprise the revenues that fund the water services needs. And actually, I skipped the non-rate revenues. Non-rate revenues are things like your income earnings from interest and other types of fees that are just 3% of the revenues. Those are external to this study, so we won't be going over those. I'm going to start back at that financial planning task that we began the study with. And this forms the basis for the monthly user charges. Way back in the fall, we talked about key financial assumptions and adjustments. And when we started this process, we had to identify and make sure we included these financial assumptions in our analysis. We worked with your water services staff and management services staff and customer service in order to make sure that we had all these assumptions in line. So these include growth. We're assuming 1% account growth for water and wastewater. Reclaimed water is assuming no growth. We have reserve targets that need to be maintained, and that includes an operating reserve of 90 days of operations and maintenance expenses. There's also debt service coverage ratios that we must meet and other metrics, other financial targets that help us determine how much revenue needs to be collected from the funds each year. The base operating budgets we talked about last fall regarding the O&M or operations and maintenance budgets that are needed to pay your employees and operate your systems and pay for chemicals, et cetera. We also have cost escalation factors and CIP escalation. So we have those capital improvement program costs that are not only in today's dollars, but escalate over time. You'll see the different funding sources, and we have brought up the major funding for projects such as the water supply security projects and the wastewater treatment plant expansion, which sources are not quite identified yet, but they will be fleshed out over time. Back in the fall, we started with multiple financial scenarios. This is a recap of the scenarios that we brought to you in October, and they range all the way from your current, basically keep rates the same approach and fund the approved CIP that the finance team prepares in the 5-year balance plan. Then we looked at a CPI or consumer price index increase. That was a 5% increase annually, and that was able to fund a certain amount of operations and maintenance expenses and CIP. Then we had something called fix and go. So this was adjust your rates to the level of inflation and then move on from there, and that turned out to be 8.5% rate increases each year. Then we had that scenario 4, which is a levelized approach that would help fully fund the capital improvement program. So not just the approved capital improvements, but the unfunded projects and the informed projects from your master plans. So this is the scenario that we honed in on, but after discussing these plans with you, we came up with scenario 5, which we're labeling the alternative option, and that's where we landed, and that's what drove all the results that you're seeing today. And this scenario 5 takes a look at fully funding the capital improvement projects, fully funding the base operating budget. However, the rate increases are levelized. These rate increases also don't necessarily mean that's how everyone's rates will go up. And that's because we have to run this through the cost of service analysis and the rate structure analysis, which we recently went through. So you'll see that going forward. We'll start with the water fund, and I'm just going to reiterate the assumptions that we used when we walked through the financial plans for the water fund. back at the beginning of this study, this was 10 months ago, we had a forecast, a 5-year financial outlook that has changed since then. However, that's where we started. So your management services team has since revised some funding sources and revised some estimates going forward for operations and maintenance expenses and loans, et cetera. So what we're seeing here is where we started the rate study. And this, at the start of the rate study, we were looking at a depletion of your cash reserves in the water fund. And as I mentioned, this was at the beginning of the study, so everything we looked at from that point to today has looked at bolstering those reserves, meeting all of your financial targets, and accomplishing that CIP program. This chart is new for you. We haven't shown you this yet, but it tells you and shows you the composition of annual operating expenses plus debt service over time. We are currently in the fiscal year 2024, so that's our first year here. And then the 5-year plan for this rate study goes from fiscal year 2025 through 2029. And we're showing the next 4 years through 2033 so that you have an idea for how we're forecasting costs to increase over time. We're showing the breakdown of personnel services, so that's salaries and wages and benefits. And then we show you variable operations and maintenance expenses, which include things like equipment maintenance and chemicals and electricity expenses, et cetera. Then the blue section are fixed operations and maintenance expenses. The majority of utilities costs are fixed. That's why you see that that's the largest piece of the puzzle here for each of these bars. So these are a lot of the other expenses that you have to operate and maintain your system. And then we have capital outlays. We have ongoing operating capital, we have machinery and equipment, et cetera. The debt service piece is that top section of the dark green section for the annual debt service that needs to be paid, both existing and projected. You've probably seen this before, this full CIP list for the water fund. This list includes not only the approved CIP projects that your finance team has brought to you, but also the informed capital improvement projects that have been on the books and in the forecast for a long time, plus some unfunded projects. This list does not include those large water supply projects, by the way, but it does include in the asterisk projects, these are projects that are intended to be funding through grants. So your teams are really working hard to obtain grant funding, and there's a forecast of significant grant funding still moving forward. In total for this 10-year plan, in today's dollars, it's about $182 million. Of course, once we add escalation, that 4% escalation factor every year, that escalates to something a little bit higher, $214 million. Excuse me. This chart shows the breakdown of anticipated funding sources for that escalated capital improvement program each year. I'm going to reiterate that your management services and finance has actually come up with some additional or different funding options here. So the grant funding is a little different and the loan plan is forming. This is where we were looking to fund these projects through the fall. So it's not set in stone. As you know, these costs can change over time, but at the point of where we are today, we're expecting the majority of the capital improvements to be funded through cash or reserves. So it's not all annual rate revenues, it's reserves that have been built up over time. Then grants, revenue, and from borrowing, and then capacity fees. The little table at the bottom shows you that it's about $20 million a year in escalated dollars that are planned to be funded through this program. You've seen this chart before. This represents the option that you directed us to follow last fall, which we're calling the alternative option. So it's a levelized plan for adjusting rates over time from 2025 through 2029 to achieve that full CIP funding level. Now, I have to also mention that just because, and we've seen this, that just because I'm saying there's 15% rate adjustments, that doesn't mean that the rate increases are necessarily 15% for every person in this first year. So you'll see that as we look at the rates, that this 15% is a rate revenue adjustment that is needed to achieve those financial targets that we talked about and the capital improvement funding. We'll move on to the wastewater fund, and you'll see the same charts, but just from the wastewater fund perspective. Back when we started the rate study 10 months ago, we were looking at a similar situation, that without adjusting rates and looking at your approved capital improvements with escalation and a base budget adjustment for your operations and maintenance expenses, it looked like the cash balances were going to be depleted very quickly. And that's what drove this, looking at alternative rate adjustments, just like we did for water. Again, this forecast has changed. Your management services team has adjusted these forecasts. But this is what drove the bulk of the study for wastewater. We're showing a similar chart for the composition of annual operating and maintenance expenses needed for wastewater, as well as the debt service that needs to be paid. So again, personnel services and fixed and variable operations and maintenance expenses, as well as capital outlay and debt service. The wastewater capital improvement program project list is a little less than water, but it's still significant. You'll see the projects include some pretty significant projects, so aging infrastructure replacements that are planned annually, and the Rio Solids Treatment Project, et cetera. So there are quite significant projects on this list, including some unfunded estimates. We're showing these all together in one list, but as you know, these are scheduled to be needed over time. The total in today's dollars is $116 million. When you apply escalation to that total, it's $144 million that needs to be funded over the next 10 years in wastewater. And we're expecting, again, approximately $94 million to be funded through reserves or cash from rates. No grants are projected here, but some borrowing through revenue-funded loans. And then capacity fees are a good portion of these expenses. I'd like to note that these projects do not include any GO-bonded debt. So anything that's, any projects in the wastewater fund that are paid for through property taxes from the GO debt, that's not included in this analysis. It's external to all of this. Showing a similar forecast here for the wastewater fund. This one is a little more significant in the first 2 years. It's a 25% rate revenue adjustment for the first 2 years. Then it drops down to 15% and then 10% adjustments. This is needed to be able to fund that levelized capital improvement program and the operations and maintenance expenses. Lastly, we have Reclaimed. Reclaimed shows a similar picture when we started looking at the study. We are looking at a little bit more time to use the reserves and the cash balances to fund their reclaim program, but then over time it was expected to level off and deplete the cash reserves without a rate increase. But as we know, we've talked about this, that reclaimed water rates are currently a percentage of the potable water rates. So as you adjust your potable water rates, the reclaimed water rate adjustments will go into effect and therefore fund more capital projects and be able to sustain the fund through time. We have a similar table for a similar chart showing the composition of expenses. There's no debt in the Reclaimed Water Fund currently, so you don't see any debt service bar, but you'll see again the fixed operations and maintenance expenses are the largest piece of these annual expenses. The full Reclaimed Water project list comprises about $57 million of project costs in today's dollars. That includes some projects that are funded through loans, future loans, and hopefully grants. In escalated dollars and limited to the amount that could be funded with the proposed rate plan, that is about $11.3 million of projects that can be funded with the plan that we've been looking at over the past 10 months. All of that comes from reclaimed water sales. So 11.3 million is the plan for the version that we're going forward with. Similar to the other funds, we're showing you that forecast of rate projections, and because of the current policy that is limiting those reclaimed water rates to the potable water rate increases, we're showing those at 15% increases. We've discussed over the past few months that the Reclaimed Water Fund is fully funded. It's not being subsidized. It's just that the capital improvement projects that I showed you, that bigger list, is not able to be funded with this level of rate adjustments. And we heard from you from our last meeting that you would like the city or the water services to research and to dig into the reclaimed water rates and look more into how to adjust those rates if needed. I'm going to keep moving on to capacity fees, if that's all right. This is a lot of material that you've seen over the past few months. I hope these are good memories. The capacity fee section of the study takes a look at another section of your customers. These are your brand new customers, so new connections to the system. You might recall that there are 3 industry-accepted approaches to calculating capacity fees. These are the buy-in method, the incremental method, and then a combined method that looks at both of those. So the buy-in method looks historically at your investments in your current system and the capacity available in your current system. The incremental method looks forward. That looks at your capital improvements that are intended to expand your capacity in the system. The combined method looks at both. So you directed us to look at the combined method. So the combined method for water capacity fees and wastewater capacity fees takes into account historical system investments and then that future growth-related capital improvements. Please note on this slide, we're not showing the large capital projects costs, and that will come into the fee in a second. The second important piece of our discussion regarding capacity fees was the level of service discussion. Level of service is the assumed capacity of a new connection. And there are a number of ways you could look at this. We could use the design standards that are in city code, or we could use an actual use level of service that more closely reflects your recent water usage characteristics and household characteristics. After review of those 2 methods, you directed us to look at the actual use level of service, where we're looking at an assumption of 335 gallons per day per equivalent residential unit for water. And then on the wastewater side, we're looking at both components of usage, so 257 gallons per day of capacity for wastewater flow, plus a loadings or strength component of 0.67 pounds per day of loadings for a typical connection to your system. By using those factors, that's how we can calculate how much one new connection should pay to buy in and to also pay for the cost of growth in your systems. When we talked with you about capacity fees a few months ago, and we talked to the Water Commission, there were a few key points that we asked for direction, and you provided. As I mentioned, you directed us to use the combined methodology for calculating the fees, which we've done. Then use the system actuals as the basis for the level of service of how much one new connection requires. Then you asked us to include the cost of future water supply infrastructure projects in the water capacity fee calculation. So that would give Water Services the ability to start collecting for those future projects, those future water supply projects. Next, at the same level, on the wastewater side, you gave us direction to calculate capacity fees so that Water Services could start collecting fees towards the cost of a new wastewater treatment facility. So those are all factors we're going to talk about. And then finally, we're going to include a factor of loadings or strengths of wastewater flow into that capacity for wastewater connections. Out of all those projects that I showed you earlier that were water-related projects, water fund projects, this is the list that includes some component for growth, whether all for new customers or a portion. So you'll see that out of this list, there's about $70.5 million of your 10-year CIP projects that are growth-related on the water side, plus approximately $230 million for future water supply projects. Those were the costs of the future projects that we included in this capacity fee calculation. This table we presented during one of our meetings, and what's highlighted in orange is your selected or preferred approach for water capacity fees. We called it 1B, which was future water supply and using the actual usage for level of service. That takes the existing capacity fee for a 3/4 inch water meter of $5,728 to $8,146. We have again, we are showing the increase for a 2-inch commercial meter as well. The actual capacity fee schedule is based on water meter size, and this table, all the way at the end, shows the proposed fees by water meter size. You'll see that just for comparison's sake, the majority of your current customers are 3/4 inch water meters, because those are residential sizes, but also a lot of commercial customers have 3/4 inch meters, and this just shows their average monthly usage. So this is information that you had requested before. An ERU factor is an equivalent residential use factor. So this means that different meter sizes have different equivalencies. And that's actually how we calculated the proposed fees. We take the 3/4 inch meter fee and we multiply it by the ERU factor to get that dollar amount. If one of your connections is seeking to increase capacity, so increase the size of its meter, then the fee is the difference between the 2 meter sizes. So the new meter versus the existing meter. So it's not an additional fee, it's just that incremental fee. Moving on to wastewater, we have that similar list of projects that has either entirely a growth-related component or it looks like 50% is pretty common for these projects. So at least a portion of all these projects is attributable to growth or expansions of the system, and that's about $38.2 million, plus the wastewater treatment plant expansion, which, as I mentioned, is as yet not determined yet for the total funding source, but it is identified as being growth-related. So we would fund that in the capacity fees. We presented you with a lot of options on the wastewater side. There were 8. And you directed us to look at 1D, which is using or including the wastewater treatment expansion costs in the capacity fee calculation, using the actual level of service with flows and a loadings component. So given all that, the fee itself has for a 3/4 inch residential meter is not that large of an increase, but it is an increase from $3,723 per connection to $4,086. Then you also see an increase on the commercial or the higher meter size. A better way to look at it would be this table, which again, just like for the water side, is based on water meters and water equivalent meters. So this shows you the proposed wastewater fees by meter size. It is important to note that for larger meter sizes, we recommend that your water services take a look at that individual customer's needs, because we're looking at flows and loadings rather than apply just a standard factor to that account, like say the meter's a 4-inch meter. The type of unit or type of customer that 4-inch meter represents is important in factoring the appropriate capacity fee. Another note is that in your current capacity fee schedule for wastewater, you'll notice that for all of the residential, single-family residential connections, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, the fee is the same. And that is what we are still proposing, that you keep that fee for single-family residential at the 3/4 inch level. The reason behind that is because typically when a single-family residential purchases a larger water meter, it's for outdoor irrigation purposes rather than indoor water use that would contribute to wastewater flow. So the equivalent wastewater usage is still assumed to be that associated with a 3/4 inch meter. And then on the other side, the multifamily connections. Multifamily connections are billed based on per unit. So if, regardless of the connection in that multifamily unit, regardless of that water connection size, the fee is assigned as a 3/4 inch meter per unit. So if it's a 12-unit apartment complex, there would be 12 times 4,086 rather than the meter size based fee. That's how you currently assess that type of charge, and we're proposing no change to that. Capacity fees are done. The next section is something that we haven't discussed yet. This is the miscellaneous service fees. Miscellaneous service fees are those fees that are charged for non-volume or non-water and wastewater hookups. So, I shouldn't say hookups. These are things like if you have a late payment, or if you get disconnected and you want to be reconnected, or if you have a permit for your scavenger waste that you're bringing to the wastewater treatment plant. These are all services that water services staff and customer services perform, and we want to make sure that those fees are set appropriately so that they don't have to be recovered in the water and wastewater rates. When we look at miscellaneous fees and we update these fees, we talk to staff members and we ask what activities are performed during that service. So we could determine who performs the service, how many hours are spent, and how much really does that cost. So we build up the cost for those fees. We have a cost template. Stantec has a lot of models, financial models, Excel models. So we compile this information in a model and calculate a fee for that service. Then we talk to staff about the implications of charging that cost-based service. There could be a rationale for not charging 100% of that cost recovery. And during our conversations, we discussed things, and I'll bring up one in particular when I get to that in the table. I'm going to start with water meter installations. So when a new connection is coming to the city to put in a new connection, new household, new business, a water meter needs to be purchased and installed. These fees have not been adjusted for quite a few years. I think the latest may have been in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. So the cost of meters has gone up like everything. We talked with water services staff about the cost of meters by size, the labor needed to install these meters, and any other equipment like using a truck. So those are all the things that go into calculating this fee. The table here shows the current fee per connection, and then the proposed fee. For a 3/4 inch meter, that proposed fee is $596 higher than what's currently charged. And that is primarily the cost of the water meter itself. So that's the cost of that equipment. and labor. So you'll see that there are corresponding increases for the different meter sizes. Anything larger than 2 inches, so a 3-inch meter or 4-inch meter, should be at cost. So your water services team knows how much those meters cost to purchase and install. So that's water meter
I have a
installation.
quick question. Is this included in the hookup fees that we're discussing, or is this a separate miscellaneous charge in addition to the hookup fee?
So Mayor, if you're referring to the capacity fees, it's separate. So this is the cost for that actual physical connection. The capacity fee covers the cost of capacity that's being built in the system. Next, we're looking at service charges, and the majority of these are charged through customer service. In addition to updating these fees, we're proposing with the customer service department a change in the name of the fee. So the current code has different names for these fees. Turn on, turn off fees is one that you'll see. And it really is called a water service establishment fee. So setting up a new service for a new account. And this would be the next business day. Currently, the fee is $24. Based on the cost, we feel it should be $45, which is $21 higher. If a customer requires a establishment of service that day, that same day, that puts additional pressures on staff. So we looked at it in terms of a $20 surcharge on top of the $45 fee for water service establishment. So that total fee would be $65. And that's just a little bit of clarity in how customer service charges for these same-day requests. The collection or non-payment charge is an example of where, when we calculated the full cost of service, it was much higher than the $45 that we're proposing to be charged. The rationale for charging something less than 100% of full cost recovery is that oftentimes the customer is a delinquent or shut off for non-payment. And if that is because of a burden on that customer for paying water bills, we don't want to exacerbate the burden by putting yet another fee on them. So we want a fee that happens to me all the time. Okay. So this is just a reason to collect less than 100% of what the costs tell us that should be for a good policy and rationale. The other charges on this page are proposed to stay the same. In talking with staff, they felt that meter testings, backflow prevention, et cetera, are at the right level. The next table are fees that are associated with the industrial pretreatment program, so on the wastewater side, and this is a whole section in your code, and it has to do with pretreatment discharges and scavenger waste. So the industrial pretreatment discharge fee is actually a 5-year permit, and there are about 6 or 8 pretreatment customers who have to pay this permit every 5 years. It's a staggered fee, but currently, that fee over 5 years is $1,250. We found in talking with staff that that is severely under recovering the actual costs that are incurred to monitor these industrial customers. So the proposed fee is $1,950. That represents the cost of escalation from the last time the fees were changed, I think in 2020, to today. So to 2025, so a 5-year adjustment for inflation. And again, another reason for less than 100% of cost recovery would be that those costs would be quite high. As you could see, just 1950 is only 3% of the 100% cost recovery. The next three sections are called scavenger waste. So these are septic haulers, so from septic tank discharges, restaurant grease, and mud sump discharges. These fees are in a per $100 charge. And currently, the scavenger wastes are, for septage are $8 per 100 gallons. We're proposing that fee be changed and increased to $11, and restaurant grease would be the same at $11. Oftentimes, a truck will bring in waste that is not distinguished between restaurant grease or septic waste, so that charge per 100 gallons would be the same for both to avoid undercharging for one. And then the mud sup waste cost is proposed to increase by $6. There are after-hours fees and scavenger waste permit fees that we are proposing here as well. One more page on miscellaneous fees. Should I pause or keep going?
Yeah, if we can just take a quick pause.
Okay.
We're good to go. Sorry for the interruption.
I'm sure Mayor and Council like a little break. The last table that I'm going to go over for miscellaneous fees are sewer surcharge rates. You have some customers, some industries, who have high-strength wastewater discharge. Based on their current rates and limits on how much they can discharge into the system, a surcharge is assessed when that waste exceeds that discharge rate. So the current fee, and remember we have BOD, which is biochemical oxygen demand, and TSS, which is total suspended solids. Those are the measures of strength in a wastewater. So if that discharge is over a certain limit, there is an additional amount, or that surcharge is assessed to that flow for that customer. Based on the results of the cost of service study, we feel that both of those charges for BOD and TSS should increase, and the increase is roughly 15 cents, per pound of discharged waste of an increase for both of those. That aligns that surcharge with the cost of service results. In your code, you actually charge extra high and really high strength, so a doubling of the surcharge and a tripling of the surcharge for really high wastewater discharge strength. But that is an uncommon practice in the industry, and really the 500th milligram per liter versus the 300 or the 350 milligram per liter it's not really that different of a cost. So we're proposing that those charges get eliminated, and we just have you assign one surcharge rate for each of these components and change the code accordingly. Do you have any other questions on miscellaneous fees before I move on?
Councilmember Matthews, you had a question. Is it about everything, or is it, okay. Anyone else have a question about what we've discussed so far? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The last section, probably the one most fresh in your mind, are the cost of service rates and rate designs. We saved these for last because, again, these are monthly user rates make up the largest proportion of revenues for the water, wastewater, and reclaimed water funds. When we met at the end of last year, we talked to you about your priorities for rate structures and rates. These were revenue stability, conservation, demand management, administrative burden, and proportionality between and within classes that used to be called equity, and then affordability. So we wanted to make sure that when we talked about rate structures, rate designs for water and wastewater, we covered and accounted for your priorities. When we started talking about water rates, we presented you with 3 options and then a revised option. So we started with option 1, that essentially was the same as your current rate structure, but that we just adjusted the amount of revenue that you would recover from your base or fixed charges so that you would put more of a price signal on that volume rate part of your rate structure. So this would give customers a larger price signal that when the more water they use, the higher their bill would be. Option 2 took that option 1 and built upon it. We looked at changing the residential tiers, and I won't go into all of the details unless you prefer I do, but at this point we made a small adjustment in order to adjust the residential tiered structure. Option 3 took option 2 with the change in residential tiers, and then it suggested a combination of 2 classes to simplify the rate structure and the administration of that particular rate. Based on our joint meeting between you and the Water Commission, the third option was revised to further refine that residential tiered approach, and that's what we'll talk about tonight. On the wastewater side, we had, again, 3 options, and those 3 options increased in accomplishing those priorities. So we started with a cost of service option with the same rate structure that you currently have, which would be no fixed charge, only volume rates by customer type. Then in option 2, we added that fixed charge, very similar to what you are currently doing in water. And we said, let's have you recover 25% of your revenue requirements through a fixed charge on the sewer side to enhance revenue stability, and then also have individual volume rates for the rest of the customer classes. And then finally, option 3 was option 2, but consolidate those volume charges based on customer type. That's what we'll talk about tonight. The chart on this page shows the 2 components of your water rate structure with the proposed option 3 revised. I'll walk through this. And we're only showing the inside city rates here. Remember, outside city customers get a 10% surcharge on the inside city rates. These rates also exclude taxes and the energy rate, the energy fee that is charged to water customers. On the water side, we have the monthly fixed meter charges. These are those meter charges by meter size. The current fixed meter charge is in this first column, and then we're proposing for 2025 that the 25% of the costs for the water fund be recovered through a fixed charge. Currently, you're recovering about 29% of your revenue requirement. We're proposing to reduce that. That still maintains revenue stability, but it pushes more of the costs on the volume rates so that it provides a larger price signal for water conservation. The total bill would be, for a customer on the water side, would be the fixed meter charge plus the volume charges. So the volume charges are represented here on the right. Single family is the only customer class that we're proposing to have a tiered rate structure. There are 4 tiers. And the current tiers are in the column here with the asterisk. We're proposing in fiscal year 25 to recover 75% of your revenue requirements from the volume rates, and the rates would be according to these tiers and these tier ratios. The second adjustment on this rate structure would be that commercials and schools and institutional customers would be combined into one class and paying the same rate per 1,000 gallons of water use. That is the proposed water rate structure. The water rate schedule for the next 5 years is presented in these charts. So the top component is the monthly fixed charge. So you have your current fixed charge. Again, we're only showing inside city rates because there are inside and outside. And then we see that the first rate adjustment would be effective September 1st of this year, so September 1st, 2024. And that would run all the way through December 31st, 2025. so same rates for more than 12 months. And then the next rate adjustment would be effective January 1 of 2026, and then you see the rest of the schedule here. The volume rates would follow the same schedule. We've shown you some projected average bill impacts previously, but we have these aligned a little differently so that you could see a representative customer for each of the customer classes. So a representative meter size along with an average monthly billed volume. Given that water meter size, that corresponds to that fixed meter charge, and the average water bill volume, that corresponds to the volume rate, we can calculate a total bill and compare it from one year to the next. So the current year, fiscal year '24, average water bill, as an example, this particular single-family user would pay $30.91. Given the next adjustment to the rate structure and the rates for starting September 1 of this year, that total bill would go up to $32.04 or $1.13 change in a month. That's a 3.7% change. The next year, the rate would go up by 15%. The point here is that when you do a cost of service analysis, you adjust your rates by customer class based on those costs of service. Then, until you have your next cost of service study, you can apply that across-the-board percentage rate increase to everyone. So you'll see that for the first adjustment, effective September 1, 2024, the percentage changes and the dollar changes, of course, are different for every representative customer. The largest impacted user would be a 1-inch landscape meter with 24,000 gallons of water used. So that would be the largest increase. But thereafter, everyone would see a 15% increase through 2029 in their annual change in their bills. So we do not have a percentage change column here, we just show that at the top. That's a lot of data.
Councilmember McCarthy has a question.
So a large institutional, that would be like NAU.
Mayor
The
and
university?
Councilmember McCarthy, yes.
So they're getting a pretty good hit, 37.9%. Well, I guess my gut reaction is that's a little high, but to get into it, then we have to go back to all the little details that we've been talking about for the last hour to change that. But I don't know. I'll just put that out there for a conversation.
Thank you. Keep going. On the wastewater rate side, I'm going to show you similar tables. We have the proposed wastewater rate structure that proposes a fixed monthly meter charge and a consolidated volume rate schedule. Again, the total bill would be a composite of that fixed monthly charge each month and the volume charge according to the class that you represent. So on the left, we have the monthly fixed meter charges by meter size. So these are water meters. We have that same equivalent residential unit factor that I mentioned before for capacity fees. And in fiscal year 2025, that proposed fixed charge would recover 25% of the annual revenue requirements for the wastewater fund. On the volume side, the color coding represents the consolidated classes. So residential customers are residential multifamily customers paying $5.50 per 1,000 gallons. Non-residential A, B, and C represent a combination of volume and strength of wastewater flow. So we've combined these classes according to their concentrations of their flows and their total loadings. So you'll see that car washes, laundromats, et cetera, through hotels and motels are combined into non-residential A. Non-residential B includes higher strength customers. And then non-residential C is in a class by itself at the highest level here. Just as in water, we're projecting those rates going forward. And again, this is that 5-year schedule for inside city only. For the top chart, these are the fixed charges that are new, so you don't have any fixed charges currently, so we just start with the September 1st, 2024 list of fixed charges. And then the proposed volume charges are condensed into the consolidated classes. We have a lot of information on this chart that you might want to take some time looking at. It's the same type of average bill impacts for this rate option. And these are for, again, representative wastewater customers. Some customers, you'll see, some customer types will actually see a decrease in their monthly bills for this first year. That is because we are, again, aligning the costs of service for 2025, fiscal year 25. This cost of service analysis hasn't been done for a while, and rates haven't been adjusted on the wastewater side since 2020. So this is it may look like a significant change, but it is because the longer you go between your cost of service resetting, the bigger the differences are. However, going forward, after this initial adjustment, all customers should see the same increase each year. So 25% increase in 2026, and then 15%, 10%, and 5% thereafter. So it's a big impact in these first couple years, but then it's projected to level out. I'm going to keep moving. We have a few more slides here. There are 2 sample bills that are on the Clean Water Flagstaff website, and we talked to you about this a few months ago. But this shows the full municipal services bill for a residential customer using 4,550 gallons per month. This breaks down the bill into the different components that they see. So a base water meter charge, the tiered residential water charges, the energy surcharge, et cetera. So you'll see in yellow, these are the charges we were just talking about, the rates for water, the rates for wastewater that we were just talking about. The 2024 column shows what this customer would be paying today in a bill today, and then what that proposed bill would be next year, or the next, starting in September 2020, fiscal year 25, and then fiscal year 29. So fast forward to the end of the rate projection period. We know that the energy surcharge and the water protection fee will change over time. So right now we're just assuming they're the same, but they're asterisk because we know that they will change. But a bill today that's $101.90 would increase to approximately $115.94, and then up to $168.20 by 2029. We just wanted to give you an idea of what a typical bill might look like in the future. Of course, changes in usage and changes in these other fees could make these forecasted bills different. We show the same type of bill for a commercial user. This commercial user happens to have a 3/4-inch water meter and over 51,000 gallons of monthly water use. So you'll see their bill components are very similar to what we just showed you for residential, but the total impact is different over time. We have one more component to rates, and those are the reclaimed water rates. We reviewed these most recently a couple weeks ago. So we're just showing that the reclaimed water rates for now are proposed to be or projected to be in line with the potable water rates for option 3 revised. Those were the rates that I showed you just a few minutes ago. So the reclaimed water rates on the monthly fixed charge side are the same as potable water. So if you have a 3/4 inch reclaimed water meter, you pay the same monthly fixed charge. On the volume side, however, the reclaimed water rates are a function of the potable water rate, the volume rate, plus the energy rate. So if you try to take your calculator and calculate that percentage of the potable water rate, we talked about this before, you have to add in the potable water rate plus the energy rate in order to get that basis for the reclaimed water rate. That was a lot of material. We covered the financial plans, we covered capacity fees, miscellaneous fees, and monthly user charges or user rates. All of these fees work together to help support and fund and keep your water services going. Water, reclaimed water, and wastewater. It's a lot of information, and I know you'll have some questions, so I don't know if you want me to pause for questions before we talk about our requested action for you tonight.
Councilmember Matthews, you were the one with the first question. Would you like to ask it now?
Thank you, Mayor. I know tonight on the agenda, we're just making a decision on whether to go through the legal process of posting that we're going to consider water rates. I have a lot of questions. You see my dining room table. I have the 77 pages of detailed information spread out. There's a lot of things that don't reconcile with me. Population growth. We had a lot of discussion on that, from the hospital's plans to presentation from Econa and stuff, and none of them come close to the population growth that we're projecting here. And also, if those projected growth rates are incorrect, that impacts our growth-related CIP. So I really want to feel warm and fuzzy about it. Also, capacity fees, if I understand it, are associated with paying for that growth in usage of our water and stuff. I see some big numbers here. So I would I spent 40 years analyzing presentations and spreadsheets and financials, and my head hurts. And it's hard to do it up here, listening to the presentation. You've done a fabulous job of just trying to break it out into, segments so we can try to digest it. I know Aaron's worked on it hard as well, and I appreciate that. I don't think right now I can have a discussion with our community and say with confidence that I am confident that we need these projects. I am confident that we kicked a lot of these projects down the road for years. I can say that. But, this is an amazing no-growth strategy. I mean, we are already very expensive to live here. And when the community starts being able to use modeling scenarios, which you all told me you guys would have up and running soon, I think they will. Maybe I'll be wrong, and they'll be, oh yeah, I can afford, an extra $1 million a year if they're, NAU or somebody else. I don't think so. I think they'll be as worried about it as I am. And so I really would like somehow to have just a work session where we're not just, you're doing a presentation, other presenters are waiting to do their thing. I want to ask and have numbers like, what if we, moved it out a 7-year or 10-year plan? What if we took out projects like Red Gap Branch? What if we, projects that aren't even on the books for 10 more years? And what if? what does that look like? And have a more relaxed public meeting to have those conversations so that we can all, feel better about the pain of these increased rates and know that we exhausted all questions and conversations, so we can feel confident when we're talking to our community about the process. It's hard to stay not glazed over. Maybe it's just me. But if we could do that, and I know time is running out, we're going to, if we move this today to post the rate change, we've got, a very short amount of time to really go through everything and ask the questions and find out the answers and run some scenarios. And so I think it's going to take more than just an hour or two presentation on the dais where we could just dedicate. I don't know what that looks like, if that's acceptable with the city manager or not, but I don't know how to get my head around this, and I've got it all spread out in I got a list of questions already, but, to have those back and forth and have those answered and go, oh, okay, then what about this? And that's just what I'd like to ask.
So Mayor and Councilmember Matthews, I think that's a great idea from what I understand, and I would defer to Director Jones. I believe we do have some time, and that tonight, if you approve the notice of intention to change rates, then perhaps we could set up some of those work sessions where we could dig into those what-ifs. Would that be? Okay.
Well, and I'll also ask Stacy, because I know that our agendas for the next couple of meetings are really packed. What is what's the process if we were to have a work session on a different day and this was the only topic?
I think it's something that's very doable, Mayor. I think it's a good idea to try to separate this conversation out from a regular meeting that's full of other things that definitely need to be with, action taken on it. So it would just be a matter of finding a date that works for the council, that works for staff and our consultants. But it's a doable option for sure.
Sterling?
Mayor, from a legal perspective, any number of work sessions is permissible prior to that June 18th public hearing date to make sure the council is comfortable with what's being presented on that date and the public is aware. So, thank you.
And we don't need a quorum, right? If we're just going to be asking questions and there's no decision-making, or do we still need a quorum?
For a work session, yes. Yeah.
Was Sterling squirming as much as I was? Yes, you would need an agenda, minutes, full quorum of council. It would
All
be an
right.
actual meeting.
Okay. Shannon?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to take that conversation a bit further, if you were looking for something like a town hall, similar to what we did at the East Flagstaff Library, where folks can come and ask questions, we can walk them through the calculator, and council would participate in that. I think that's one format versus having an official work session. So depending on which one works best for you, I think we can accommodate both. I was also going to recommend Councilmember Matthews. I think it's very helpful if we can sit down with council members, look at the same papers that you're looking at, track what your questions are, help to provide that clarity. It also allows us to map those questions over into the information that we're presenting and pulling together for community education. Because if you have the question, the likelihood is somebody else might have that same question. So being able to provide clarity to you as a council member so that you can help others understand that you're talking with, and then for us to be able to replicate the same, I think is very helpful in this process.
That's why I've been making a list. I didn't want to set up a meeting until I digested
You're ready.
the information that was emailed to me last week. So
Yeah.
that would be great as well.
Just let
In
us know.
addition, because I know that as our community members are kind of waking up to like, oh, wait, what are you saying, this rate and stuff, how does that impact me? I think they're gonna have a lot more questions, and I wanna make sure we're as transparent as possible, and that we've provided And I know staff has done a great job of, I see it every day, learn more about the water rate study and stuff, but people get busy and it just goes over their heads, and I think they're gonna wake up with sticker shock if we don't really dig into this and get our questions answered and have a forum where, our community can ask questions too in an official capacity.
Yeah, and all the advertising and the outreach that we've been talking to you and show you examples, that ramps up this week. So we're really encouraging folks to try it out and give us their feedback, ask us the questions, because that's how we make sure that folks are informed and comfortable with what we're doing moving forward.
Is the calculator available now
It is.
that encompasses all the different rate, water, reclaimed, and wastewater into one bill?
It has the water and the wastewater. It does not have the reclaimed piece of it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Harris?
Thank you, Mayor. I think what I heard Councilmember Matthews say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Matthews, you were talking or speaking about scenarios. What if we took out this? What would this look like? What if we took out this? I don't think she was asking for different rates. I think she was asking about scenarios, how we could make this less expensive. Is that right?
Yes, just to clarify, different scenarios, not only just taking, because I know everything has been communicated to us is important, although there's that big chunk of unfunded, unrecognized projects. It's like, what is that? If you don't even know what they are yet, why are we putting them in? But also, what if those what ifs? What if this wasn't a 5-year escalation? What if it was a smaller escalation over a 10-year time or 7-year time? Or what if we took out some things, or, let's talk about why you don't project any federal grant funding. I know we're running out of money, so that's probably the answer, but just having those questions asked and answered and running those scenarios like Councilmember Harris said, to say, what if we take this out? What does that look like?
Councilmember House?
Thank you, Mayor. Just along those same lines, in terms of the different scenarios, I think one of the big concerns that I'm feeling in looking at these rates, especially as it's coming together, is not only the impact to like the institutions that we clearly saw here, but also as we were talking about even something like the water hookups and some of those costs. I'm thinking immediately of affordability across the board, what that sort of change does to housing affordability, what the impact may be for our different institutions that are providing services, whether it's educational services or otherwise, the potential impacts for the affordability of things like the university or other services. And so I'm wondering how much plans like this and this sort of study takes those sort of impacts into account. If there's ways for a study like this to do that, or if that's more of the conversation that we're hoping to have coming up, is looking at those potential implications specific to some of those organizations or some of that work, and building out some of those potential scenarios of impact.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember House. When we're doing these cost of service analyses, especially if they haven't been addressed in quite a while, we often see these large impacts. If you're looking at some of the other Arizona communities that we've worked with, like the town of Surprise, City of Surprise is looking at 50% rate increases. These adjustments are shocking, and sometimes it is a matter of other policies that need to be considered in order to address those issues. So is there an affordable housing policy that perhaps you waive a certain capacity fee? Granted, whenever you are providing that kind of a benefit, it's got to come from somewhere, right? You have to, when you push in the balloon on one side, it pops out on the other, because Water Services still needs those funds to operate and to build its program. So I would say that when we can run scenarios, but I think we have to be also considering some other policies that might need to be reviewed when it comes to affordability of service. And I know we've talked in the past about other social service agencies providing some assistance to customers that have trouble or burdens, on their just cost of housing and cost of paying water and sewer bills. So if that would help with what you're concerned about, then I would say we could add that to our discussion.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's a really essential part of the conversation for me, because as we're looking at this and particularly as we're looking at these rates and these changes as ways of not only ensuring the stability of our water and meeting those community needs, but also looking at it in terms of smart growth as a city. That's another aspect of it in my mind is how it's impacting the other services that we're able to provide, how it's impacting the cost of housing overall, and all of those sorts of things that if we're making changes in one area, recognizing the impact that it has in others and how we might inadvertently be hindering some of those goals if we don't take them into consideration. So I'd very much like to see it be part of that next conversation as we start building out some of those scenarios and looking at what those possibilities are for managing these impacts.
Councilmember Sweet.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple of thoughts to offer up. I did meet with Shannon, and Aaron, and I asked a lot of the questions that we're kind of going through tonight, and I found it very, very helpful. But it did, lead to more questions. So I think with this aggressive plan, we do need to do this. I understand that. But for our community, I do think we should have another meeting where this is what we're talking about. And I'm wondering if we can frame our questions and get them to staff and to you, Carol, beforehand so that you can come up with the scenarios. It's impossible for me to ask at the meeting to map that out. It would, I think it would be good if we had that to you ahead of time so that we can kind of frame out what that meeting can look like. And I don't know if that's possible, but I do think having another work session separate would be a great idea. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
I think what we're talking about, and I don't know, it seems like you have a lot of expertise, like a lot. I'm not sure if we're at how do I take this in the spirit that it's given? So if someone is asking you, what about this scenario? And it may not come from us, it may come from someone that's at that meeting. Would you be able to do that there and give them that answer? Or would you have to say, let me get back to you? And the only reason that I'm asking you that is that if we really want to be truly transparent, then we have to be able to let folks come in and ask those questions and not us, direct the conversation, because it really is about them, not the seven of us. So they have to be able to ask those what ifs, and then we have to be able to answer them. Now, I can sit down with everyone and get a good understanding of what this is all about, but that doesn't reach the other 20 or 30,000 people or whoever, how many ever is gonna potentially do this. So if we could do something like that, and then we could film it, video it, like we do our meetings, and then people could go back later and watch, and perhaps some of their questions that someone else asked would have been answered. All I'm trying to do is just get us to a point where we can do this in the most efficient way, because the bottom line is that we got a time crunch. And so whatever it is that we do, we got to do it pretty quickly. Because, and then we have to be willing to, whatever happens, we're going to have to be willing to bite the bullet, whatever way that is. I don't know what is going to come out of that, so probably not a good analogy, but, so, thank you.
So what I'm hearing you say, Councilmember Harris, is that Shannon had said that we could either have a work session or we could combine it with the public meeting that staff already has planned. And I'm hearing you say that they really should be separate because that should be just the community asking questions. But then I think we all would like to have a work session where we can dig into these questions as well. And there were 2 points made about questions ahead of time. Would that be helpful to you in preparing? Or can you go with questions presented to you at the work session?
So Mayor and all council members, we have a model that is meant to run scenarios on the fly. However, I would appreciate scenarios developed ahead of time. That would be very helpful. But in answer to Councilmember Harris's question about would I be able to run something that someone comes up with, I would like to believe yes. There's always something that we can't do, but if it is within the parameters of costs, timing, different levers that we've included in our modeling, then that's what we love to do. That's what you're able to do. So if we could have a combination, if we could have prepared scenarios, that would be fantastic. And if something else comes up at that time, now I want to be careful because I could get us into the weeds really quickly. So I'll have to think about how to keep it so that I don't make your eyes glaze over even more. But I would like to believe that we could accomplish this in a separate work session.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I think a lot of this discussion is basically sitting on the foundation of sticker shock. It's like, oh my God, how much are you going to raise my rates? So if somebody doesn't like that, there's only 2 ways to change that. Put the burden onto someone else or something else, or determine that we don't need to do some of the projects. So it's one thing to say, I hate this, it should be less, but that's only half the conversation. It's like, okay, you don't like it, where do you want it? I like your analogy of you push on the balloon and it goes in here, but then it pushes out on the other side. So that's exactly what we're up against. We spent a lot of time setting priorities of, do we want to charge more on the base rate, or should we charge more on the per gallon rate? And, you can change that back, but it's a zero-sum game unless we can cut projects out, and I don't think that's really on the table. If it is, let me know, but I'm thinking it probably is not. Uh-oh, Shannon's coming up. Thanks.
No, Mayor, council members, no, I appreciate, Councilmember McCarthy, I think even where you're going, I think you're touching on some good points that may be a little bit overlooked as we kind of get into the weeds, we get distracted, but on the water side, I think a point to be emphasized is there's a dramatic change that council gave direction in the model for the water rate structure. Currently, we're collecting 29% of our revenues to the base rate, and you lowered that to 25%, which puts power back into the customer's hands. We put less emphasis on the base and said, ultimately, because conservation is a core value, the more you conserve, you have control over what your final bill comes in. Sticker shock, when you look at the numbers, there's so many scenarios and we average them. We take medians, we take modes to look at that. What it's not projecting is when you look at the sticker shock, I would say the ones that are having sticker shock are the ones that are using large volumes of water. Granted, right, that is a sticker shock, but another way to look at that would be is that's also a customer that has a lot of control over the destiny of what their water bill does look like. I just don't think that should be glazed over. I think that's an important concept, and I feel it's integral to the way the model was built because that is a core value, right, of our community, is that conservation. That's why the base rates were adjusted lower to give more power back. And that's why cost per thousand escalating up in that use comes at a premium. The sticker shock, I get that. Understanding the cause and effect of that is, again, when you're using, again, when you look at an individual using 4,000 gallons a month, I don't feel like we're seeing the sticker shock there. You're using 4 million gallons a month, there probably is a sticker shock. And so I think keeping that in context of what does that look like? What does the customer have power over? And then what does Water Services and the city's team provide as far as resources that can additionally help you be successful moving forward? I also appreciated what you said about, the list of projects, like, right? And we can start there, as opposed to, well, tell me what you can do in 10 years. Mainly because I also have sticker shock of a project that we're going to be bringing before you for approval that started over 10 years ago. Over 10 years ago, that project was $3.5 million. And we didn't do it because that was too expensive. And every 3 years, that project has doubled in cost. Now I'm going to be coming before you with a project that's no longer $3 million, right? It's somewhere between the magnitude of 8 to 12 million. And me saying, man, I wish I would have done that 10 years ago, right? That was cheap. So when you draw out a project, I cannot predict into the future. But I can look at the last 10 years and see escalations that, again, about every 3 years, I feel like that project is doubling in cost. And if I don't do that project this year and I come back in 3 years, we probably won't be talking 10 to 12 million dollars. That's what worries me. So again, the difference of, okay, well, let's just don't do it, then that moves off the table, right? Telling me that, well, we should do that in 5 years. The sticker shock that we're seeing today is going to be even greater. So I think you were just touching on a good couple of concepts that I wanted to highlight, like you were taking us down that path, and I appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
And Shannon, I appreciate your comments. I think they're right on. I was just trying to bring out the idea that, we can't just reduce impacts. We have to move it to somewhere else. So if somebody says, well, let's reduce this, okay, where do you want to increase it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Harris.
Say one last thing. Exactly what you said is what the community needs to hear. And so that needs to be part of our conversation, is that if I take it from here, where do you suggest I take it from? I had an institution ask me about this whole rate thing, and my response back to them is that, you know what? Can you figure out another way to do this? And so I think we need to ask folks, can you figure out another way to do? If we're not the brightest light on the tree, maybe you are. And so if you can figure it out, tell us, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, we haven't lost anything. So I say, let's do this. Let's just get out there and see what happens.
So I'm going to propose that we go into your recommendations, and then we take public comment, and then we give our final direction.
Thank you, Mayor. With that, we are to our requested action and adoption of the notice of intention. I am not sure how to proceed.
Mayor and council, it's just a simple resolution. It's a notice of intent. Of course, if you don't do anything with it, the notice of intent just has to be done 60 days prior to the public hearing. All of these other discussions, like I said, can still happen prior to that. So, thank you.
And Madam Mayor, point number 3 is the written report and cash flow analysis. Stantec will have a draft report. It might be 200 pages with appendices. That will be on the website per statute for the public to review. That expands on the report that was draft from December, Councilmember Matthews. So it'll have the most up-to-date information within it. That's a very important component of this as well, as that report for review.
All right, so before we discuss and give final direction, I would like to take public comment. So, Stephen Poor.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Councilman Harris, you are the brightest on the tree, don't kid yourself. I wanted to bring up a couple of things related to this, and I think it kind of ties in with Council has been talking about, what Councilwoman Matthews and Harris brought up in particular. And that is some of the key assumptions that go into this, and I'm sure they can kick out of their model what's the net result if you tweak some of these, or if you go a different way, or what's behind what they have. And I'd like to just highlight two different numbers, talk about the population growth, and talk a little bit about cost escalation, and where I've used those numbers over my 30 years plus in the financial industry when I forecasted. And I'm not claiming I'm an expert forecasting. I'm recognizing that forecasting is something that we must do, and we're never going to get it right, but we're going to give it our best shot. And that's what I hope that this comes to. Maybe the meeting will help. Real quick. So, over the last, if you look at the Arizona Regional Economic Analysis Project, and I brought this to the council's attention, we talked about NAU and 480. For the last 4 or 5 decades, the growth in Flagstaff for every 10 years is laddered down. In the 90s is 1.9. The first 10 years of this century, 1.5. The last 10 years, 0.9. That's your MSA, not the city. We can talk about the differences. I would suggest, given that we've got a little housing issue, a land constraint, that you're going to grow slower than the rest of the MSA that has a lot more land than you do. So let's go into this. The staff comes up and says, okay, let's project 1.4%, okay? Now, why does that matter? Well, last November 29th, you employed a consultant to give you a report on a lot of things with regards to the economics of this town. And one of the things they talked about was the population growth. And they suggested it's not going to grow 1.4. It hasn't grown 1.4 for 25 years, for God's sake. And it's going slower. What they projected is going to grow like 0.75%. And after in 2040, you're going to shrink. That's the consultants in the meeting you all sat at, okay? Not Steve's. Now, why is that important? By 2040, you're at 89,000, 90,000 people. By 2051, if you grow at 1.4, then you've got to go build that pipeline from Red Gap. You're never going to need Red Gap if we're right at 0.079. And why is that? So what's behind those numbers? The fertility rate in this country has been declining for decades. You're at 1.79, you need 2.1 to have population growth. I asked for a minute or two.
I have a question about your calculations about population growth and what we're seeing nationwide and how it is reflected in Flagstaff.
Sure. When I looked at these numbers back for NAH 480, I took a look at for these last 5 decades, and the population by this group gave the country, and the country grew at a rate. Arizona grew at a rate a couple percentages higher. Okay, not 10, a couple of percentages higher. Don't remember off the top of my head. And Flagstaff grew a little bit in any given decade faster or slower than Arizona during the last 50 years. Okay, and if you get closer to this time frame, those numbers come very close to each other. That is, the growth of Arizona is very close to Flagstaff for some of the reasons we all know with regards to we don't have housing for people here, and we're now one of the costliest zip codes in the state. And people can go live in the valley a lot cheaper. And there's a lot of places that they could go live outside the valley. That's going to be a lot cheaper than Flagstaff. So That's the answer to those numbers. You can go back to your presentation from, I think it was Pollock, who gave you that presentation on 11/29, and they got their numbers. And I just like to say those numbers, and most numbers you should ask about, are driven by the fertility rate, which I heard last month is now 1.6. You need the fertility rate, the deaths. We predict deaths pretty good here. That's not difficult. Wild card's immigration, but that's driving population. We're barely growing as a country. We're projected in the future not to grow that much at all as a country. And what's going to come here, given the cost of living, I don't know. But I would suggest the 1.4 that feeds into the Red Gap Ranch pipeline at $160 million looks like that's not going to happen in 2050 if you adjust those numbers. But put it to the model and see what happens. So their growth at 1% account growth here, remember that's account growth, households, right? We're talking about population. 2 people per household maybe? I don't know what the exact number is in Flagstaff. We'll give that a shot though. So you're not talking about 1.4, you're not talking about 1%, you're talking about half of 0.7. You're talking about 3.75 account growth just on the residential side, and I know you got commercial and other things. That's going to grow slower too. But anyway, just FYI. Last thing I'll mention, the inflation factors here. You got 3.5%. You got utilities at 6%. You got CPIs adjusted at 4%. So there's something called Treasury Indexed Inflation Bonds, 10 years. They trade in the open market. You would look at those against the fixed rate of 10-year treasuries. The difference is what the market's assuming inflation's going to be for the next 10 years. What's it been since inflation took off in 21? Between 2 and 2.4. Is it 2.4 today, guys? Not 3.5, not 7, not 6, not 4, 2.4. And I think if you throw some of these numbers in there, here's the downside, here's the upside, come up with the rationale why some of these things are going to grow faster. I could come up with some why utilities are going to grow faster. Okay, but I'm just pointing out there's some numbers out there at the market that can help you and guide you. And I think it'd be helpful for the community, A, to have that meeting, and B, to have the model outputs. Thank you for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Poor. All right, I don't see any additional public comment. So, all right, council. I'm hearing that we want to have a work session separate from a council meeting or separate from a regular work session with other items on the agenda. And we want to, the town hall that you're already planning on having, correct? Or,
We actually had that event, Mayor. It was a week ago? Yeah, at the East Flag Library. So that's what I was referencing. We could do something similar like that if we wanted to do another separate item.
yeah, I'm thinking that I'm hearing a consensus that we want to redouble our efforts to make sure that the public is understanding what it is that we're talking about here and that they have the opportunity to ask questions or to watch. Was that recorded?
So it was a round table. So there was basically tables set up in a room where folks could come in. They have a map of who was where. We could do the rate calculator for them, ask questions about operations, maintenance, the capital projects. I think we had 4 community members in attendance at that point. Erin's been doing a lot of tabling though, where she's also been able to share this information and do some calculations. So I'll turn it over to her so she can maybe talk about those experiences as well if you'd like to hear that.
So, Mayor, yes, we've been tabling. I've been alongside Water Awareness Month. We were at Science Saturday at Willow Bend, and I was at the Aquaplex on Saturday. We were at Joe Montoya on Wednesday. That was fun. Those guys are hoot and gals. Mostly the residents I've talked to, they understand it. They appreciate the heads up that we're giving them a 5-year window of impacts. The only comment card I received was from a senior asking if we'd consider a senior discount. I've probably talked with 20 residents, 25 residents. So we'd like to get more participation, but it's not coming.
Councilmember Matthews?
Thank you, Mayor. And someone mentioned it earlier, the residential, there's less number of households that'll be impacted, although families that are doubling up, sharing rooms, they will be in the tier that takes more of a brunt of it. But I'm just now hearing the business community is now paying attention. The nonprofits, we have, 2 nonprofits in town that just recently stepped into, multi-unit facilities that haven't considered that. We have hotels, hospitalities. I know that our commercial rates are combined with, I think, our school rates or something, but still, there's that average, might be 50 that, are way up here in the 80,000 or 100,000 gallons a month, and maybe they haven't thought about paying attention to what that does. And I just want to make sure that we've reached out to those people, and they've done the rate calculator, and they can see how it's going to impact their business. And so if we could just have another town hall, and it'll be on our shoulders to make sure we've reached out to our constituents and get them here to pay attention, that would be lovely. Besides 4, because we have 80,000 here, so.
We were planning the one for April 11th that we punted because we didn't have the rate calculator ready yet. And that was going to be, I think, an online, like what we did back in November, where people can call in. And we're presenting live and people can be in the venue, I think, as well. So we'll work on that plan and we'll try to execute that, very soon so that it can help inform you in advance.
Like the chamber, notify them, get them involved, and
Yeah, we'll send out emails to everyone in every way we can, so.
And Erin, you've presented to the chamber board, haven't you?
Actually, Director Jones has multiple times, and we've been on some calls with them, and would you like to comment on your interactions?
I think for clarification, I did have an opportunity to report to the board on one occasion, but we have been engaged with the business advocacy group. So we presented to them multiple times. I continue to meet with the administration from the chamber, who also facilitates that information, and they also bounce questions back, and we try to respond to those immediately. So I feel like that's been a pretty constant conversation. We also had a chance to meet with NAU, and we've met with some other local groups, which I think is a good takeaway too. I feel like while we're trying to get into the community and make that contact, we are also available either through the Clean Water Flag website, or you can reach us online. But people are reaching out to us. We're facilitating those conversations as quick as we can and trying to get the answers documented, or the questions and answered, and try to be attendant to that.
Thank you. So, Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, for the calculator that's available, has there been tracking on that to see how much it's been utilized or gather any data from that?
Mayor and Councilmember House, we just released it today, so we have only our own data but we've had a lot of website traffic since the last time we updated you. I want to say we've had a couple hundred more visits to the website, and then we can track since we release information that the calculator is available.
All right, so staff will let us know when we can arrange a work session. You will arrange another town hall in whatever way works out for schedules and venues. And council, what we need to do today is is read the resolution if we so choose. And again, this is like with sorry, I think I'm getting tired and it's only 5. With the property tax, when we have to post that we will consider raising the property tax. And we haven't raised it in many years, but we have to post as a legal matter. So, are we willing to read the resolution by title only this evening?
Mayor, I'm willing to make a motion. I move that we read resolution number 2024-19 by title only.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, City Clerk?
A resolution of the Flagstaff City Council adopting a notice of intention to increase water services rates or rate components, fees, or service charges, and setting a public hearing date on June 18th, 2024.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt?
Adopt resolution number 2024-19.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, adopted. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If I might, Mayor, just one last thing, the next step slide on here will revise, because we're talking about the same topic this Thursday with the Water Commission, and they might be interested in the same types of scenarios. But the Friday is when we'll be releasing the draft report of the full study in draft form only. And then we'll work with scheduling that work session in these next few weeks. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And thank you, Council, for your thoughtful recommendations and questions. So I've had a request to take a break. So let's take a 10-minute break, and then we will finish up with the last cap update. All right, we are ready to get started.